Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second Piece Together Our Community virtual town hall. For those of you who are returning, we would like to thank you for your continued interest. For the first timers, we hope that you find that this is a worthwhile use of your time. As we continue to explore the topics that are at the forefront of everyone's discussions, as we look at to what we can do to improve the relationship between our police community, our residents, and the other vital stakeholders in our community, including our public school systems, our employers, and other institutions. We are thankful to the mayor of Hanover Park, Mayor Rod Craig, to the village board and the administration for being so supportive in this endeavor. We thank them so much for their help along the way. We also would like to thank State Senator Murphy, State Rep Musman, State Rep Pappas, Cook County Commissioner Morrison, DuPage County Commissioner Rutledge for their participation, for their questions, and for their ongoing support as we all attempt to tackle some of these difficult questions. Tonight, our panelists include Hanover Park Police Department Chief Deputy Andy Johnson, our Hanover Park Human Resource Director Barry Kurz, and our U46 Director of, let me make sure I get her title right, Coordinator for Assessment and Accountability for District U46, Lisa Jackson. So thank you all for attending, for agreeing to be on this panel. And we hope to have a very robust discussion this evening as we talk about some questions as follow-ups from our previous panel and from our previous virtual town hall. We're going to be following up with some of those questions and also entering into some new territories, opening up some new dialogue as we hope to move. It is my hope that what we will do is move from protests and demonstrations to where we're actually having an impact on policy and procedure to the betterment of all the residents of Hanover Park and our surrounding communities. And that is with that thought in mind, I'd like to go ahead and begin some of the questioning that we have for our panelists and begin to have that discussion. So without further ado, Sharmin, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to also give a shout out to some of our trustees that are on right now, as well as our other local elected officials. You know, together we are moving forward with, we are all serving Hanover Park residents. And so a few of the others are, you know, our trustees, Lisa Gutierrez, Trustee Priggy. I noticed also Rais Yauer from Streamwood Park District, as well as Kaja Mainuddin from Hanover Township, Assad Khan from Poplar Creek Library, and hopefully we have everyone, so please continue. Okay,
so to begin our questioning, we'd like to introduce again Deputy Police Chief Andy Johnson, a very fine officer and someone who I've been privileged to interact with on many occasions, who I know is doing his best to serve our community. One of the things that came up in our previous discussion was the subject of community policing. And so Chief Johnson, I was wondering if you could give us a perspective on what community policing means in Hanover Park, and how is that actually enforced, and how is it actually laid out in policy in Hanover Park?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I appreciated being invited, and I know I speak for Chief Minot as well, that the police department appreciates being able to be part of these conversations, and we think they're relevant and important, and we're glad to be here. Community policing, you know, if I had to sum it up in one word, when it's done properly, that word would be partnerships. There are some towns, you know, will attend community events, and they'll hand out some stickers and they'll say, yeah, you know, we do community policing. But when we analyze successful community policing programs, what we're looking at is partnerships, and we're looking at how effective are those partnerships. So, you know, to what extent does a police department work with the community to identify what the problems are, that are being faced? And then the second part of that is, to what extent do they involve the community in developing solutions to those problems? And then are they following up to make sure that what has been put into place has been successful? In Hanover Park, the way that community policing, essentially is deployed in the field is through our art program. And for those that, some are familiar with this and those that aren't, with our art program, prior to that being put in place in 2010, police officers were assigned to different beats every 6 weeks. And so they were coming and going. There was less incentive to get to know the business owners and the people who live in the community. And when we put art into place, we really sent the message to police officers by assigning them to one area for a year and expecting their attendance and participation at the quarterly art meetings, telling them that, it's not just enough to show up. You've got to work together with the people in your area and get to know them, get to know what the problems are. And you're going to be ultimately held accountable for that. When you're at a public meeting and you get asked a question about, I brought this forward, what was done, and you don't have an answer, that's not what we're looking for. So for us, the community policing aspect really comes to play when we look at how we're deploying officers and our means of receiving information as to what our residents are experiencing, and then coming up with solutions to that. So the art program is the way that we deploy that in the field. But in addition to that, I think our social media platforms, are a big part of what we do with that also. We've heard over the years that there are some people or some groups maybe that are less comfortable with calling 911 or coming into the police station. So having, Facebook open, or Twitter as a means for people to send us messages about crime tips or problems or ask for help, which they do. It's not a replacement for 911 in terms of, for emergencies, but putting that into place also, I really think has helped us be more effective in building those partnerships. So, I guess the main way to cap that off is to say that it's more than just attendance. It's more than just showing up. It's more than just saying that you're a community policing agency. It's in practice building those partnerships and then putting those together to work together to keep crime down. And, I will say that since we put art into place, our Part 1 crime rate is about half of what it was prior to that. So we look at that every year, as we analyze whether or not we're being successful and what changes we need to make. But essentially, that's what community policing means to us, and that's how we put it into practice here in Hanover Park.
Great.
A follow-up question that I got from our Q&A: what step will board and police department take to make Hanover Park administration inclusive of communities who reside in the village?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of that. Is that Q&A? I can pull it up.
What step will board and police department take to make Hanover Park administration inclusive of communities who reside in the village?
Inclusive of communities. So I guess what that's asking is, to what extent do we interact with the diverse communities within Hanover Park? And I think that some efforts that we're making on that front, we do host, I mentioned the quarterly art meetings. We do host those, one of those every year all in Spanish. We held it, the last one we held was up at St. Ansgar Church, and we had, over 200 people there. And so in addition to that, I think we serve diverse communities by, through our recruitment efforts, to try to mirror the demographic makeup of the community as much as we can. I think Chief Minot has spoken on this a little bit, so I won't belabor it, but we are at about 28% minority officers, and we're trying to expand that more so that we can send a familiar face out, and mirror our demographics. We recently hired an officer who was born and raised in Baghdad. We just hired to my knowledge, our first Indian American officer. And so we're trying to make that a priority. It's in our strategic plan to rewrite our recruitment plan and make that as inclusive of diverse hiring as we possibly can. So, those are some of the ways. Additionally, we've got for volunteers, and now some of this has been slowed down with COVID, to an extent, but we do have a community emergency response team, a CERT team here in town. And we have a branch of that is fully bilingual Spanish. They train in Spanish, and we work with them, especially with St. Ansgar events. But they're also trained in traffic control and disaster response and things like that. So making our policies and procedures and programs as inclusive as possible is something that's, you know, on the forefront of our minds.
Thank you, Chief. One of the things that was brought to my attention, and you mentioned it right from the top, was community partners. And so my question is that in developing these community partners and the relationships, how successful have you been in using neighborhood associations, faith-based organizations, tenant councils, business groups, and local service providers such as the schools to have them all to come together in a common meeting to all share their concerns, their thoughts, their ideas, and their suggestions for you know, how we can police our community in a more effective manner?
Sure. You know, I could go on this question for a long time, and I'll try to be brief on that. But as far as specific examples of that, you know, our Kids at Hope program, you know, I would say the police department works to pull in as many, you know, dozens of different community resource providers to events like that. Working with the business community, you know, one of the main ways that we evaluate our officers, it's a big part of their goals are business checks. And a business check for us isn't just driving through the lot, it's getting out and talking to an employee of the business or an owner and determining, you know, how are things going and what do we need to do. Around holiday time, we put out a crime prevention tips flyer for businesses. It's in English, and then we distribute it in Spanish as well to some of our businesses. And then, you know, beyond that, I would say that pulling in these various groups has always been part of our, you know, our goals here. You may recall a couple of years back, we became one of only 25 or so cities in the United States to be accredited by the National Safety Council as under the Safe Communities America program. And in that program, we had over 30, you know, different partners from the business community, religious community, and you know, human service providers work with us to achieve those goals and get that certification. So, you know, that's something that's an excellent question, and I think we're doing the best we can to be inclusive of all those groups that you mentioned.
Okay. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask you about, and I think we spoke about it previously, was that the remote command centers, we talked about having the remote stations, and I think you indicated to me that there was a time when Hanover Park was using that concept and it was discontinued for one reason or another. Has any thought been given to reinstituting the use of remote stations or remote command centers in some of our areas that seem to have a higher preponderance of crime or instances that are reported to the police?
Yeah, I think that's something that, you know, we're certainly not opposed to. Historically, there was an apartment in Glendale Terrace that was known as the Neighborhood Resource Center. And we would staff that, you know, for a set schedule every week where we had a police officer there who was bilingual and who was, you know, someone who had taught DARE and was out in the community quite a bit and was a familiar face, so that, you know, maybe those individuals who didn't feel, you know, comfortable walking into the station here or calling 911 could come in there and get answers or, you know, file reports or, you know, in a more comfortable, closer to home setting. So I can't really speak to why that was discontinued. I think it was about 20 years ago that that ended. I think at the time, you know, they probably had experienced some sort of a dip in utilization, but that's something that we're open to as long as it would be utilized. You know, I think we've started to go that direction a little bit with moving our art meetings, our quarterly art meetings out into the community for one or two of them per area per year. You know, just recognizing that as welcoming as we try to make it, not everybody feels comfortable coming into the station. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I think we would be open to looking into that if there's space available and it's, you know, cost friendly and things like that. We're certainly not opposed to it.
Okay. Another question, Chief Johnson, and we're going to stay on you for just a minute and then we'll take you off the hot seat. But another question that came up was dealing with the bias training I know that there is a program where you're doing that, but could you explain what the initial bias training is composed of, and how often is an officer recertified in their bias training, and what type of updates are made to keep that training current?
Yeah, so there's a state mandate now that was put into place, by statute that requires us to train our officers in cultural competency. And in addition to that, they get that in the academy initially. And then the state, I believe it's every 4 years, they have to be recertified in that. But aside from that, you mentioned the word bias. There's a training program known as implicit bias training, which is put on by several different providers for that. One is Northeast Multi-Regional Training, which is the governing body for police training in the state of Illinois. They put that on, and then there are several private companies that do that as well. And that has really taken off in law enforcement over the last, I would say, year or so. It's something we're looking at doing here. The city of Elgin recently did it, and we are seeking to bring that here, probably within the next 6 months or so, to get all the officers through it. Usually the class sizes are capped at about 30. So we won't be able to do everybody at once, but I think we could phase that and get the whole department through it. And what that seeks to do is, there's a theory that there are some biases that are overt, obviously, and then there are others that people carry with them that are, maybe they're not even aware of in ways that could come out in the performance of their duty. So this program seeks to, bring those to the forefront and, help people deal with those and identify them within themselves and work through those biases. So we're looking to bring implicit bias training to the full police department, and it'll be something we're working on doing here in the coming months.
One of the things that, again, has come to me in terms of implicit bias training is the term microaggressions, which tends to feed off of the implicit bias, the microaggressions. And many times interactions between a person in authority and the public can and oftentimes result in microaggressions. So in this implicit bias training, is there going to be a sensitivity toward training toward the microaggressions that the public may be subjected to in their encounters with law enforcement or others in authority?
Well, I can't say with 100% certainty that that's part of that curriculum, but I think the microaggressions and what you're referencing are definitely a part of the de-escalation and the verbal judo training that we've put officers through. How to respond to something and in a way that diffuses it as opposed to raises it up another level. That is certainly covered within the verbal judo and the de-escalation that we're training officers in. So I can't say for sure that it's an implicit bias. It could be, but that's definitely something that we're being exposed to.
HR Director Kurz, if I could bring you in on this and talk about the implicit bias training. I think that it's important that we look at this training applying across all of the agencies within the Hanover Park, the village of Hanover Park, which would include our administration. Can you give us some insight as to what the village is doing to conduct implicit bias training for our village staff and employees?
Sure. We started our journey last November with cultural inclusion training. That was our phase 1 of our training, which we had all of our supervisors go through. This year, we're going to roll it out to the remainder of the population, and definitely looked at implicit bias, and our trainer went through microaggression as well. And that is something that we are going to continue to move forward with. So our goal is to get all employees through the training. And, the question has been, well, how do you do that with COVID and adapt to that? So that's our goal, is to get that done by the end of the year.
Okay.
I had a couple of questions, actually. One is San Francisco has committed to diverting nonviolent calls away from the police department to non-law enforcement agencies who are unarmed and have received specific training. Has any thought been given to replicating this model? So currently, we have a social worker who does handle some of these nonviolent. Well, I think they're saying nonviolent calls total. So our social worker comes in secondarily, right? So can you explain that a little bit? And then there's a second question after that for Chief Johnson. And then I'd like to hear from Lisa Jackson from U46 as well about what you've done. But you know, if you could kind of answer these questions from the attendees.
Yeah, sure. So our social worker, you're right when you say that. Our social worker generally comes in after the fact. She has responded to crisis situations that, you know, for instance, if there's a, you know, like a familial crisis where there's a domestic battery arrest, she will follow up after the fact. She will, you know, helps out with situations of, you know, people who can't take care of themselves, elder, you know, neglect. She will help make referrals. She is part of the hazardous homes investigation team. So when we, in the field, when we're coming across, you know, hoarders or people who are, you know, for whatever reason, they don't have the resources or the help they need to take care of themselves, she comes in, you know, at that time. She also, you know, one of the instances where she would respond in the field would be, we do a youth home visit program when we get referrals for, you know, a young person who may be going down the wrong path in terms of gang activity or drug use, things like that. If the parents are open to it, then we will respond to the house there and speak with the parents and the youth and try to, you know, make an intervention before things get to that tipping point where, you know, we've got criminal activity or a need for arrests and things like that. So she goes out with our officers to do that. You know, as far as, so nonviolent stuff, you know, community service stuff, you know, certainly she's involved with that and has been.
Thank you. And then the second question talks about Cook County eliminated its gang registry because it negatively impacted Black and Brown communities. Does Hanover Park have a gang registry? How is it decided that someone is a gang member, and how does one get deleted from that registry if it exists?
Yeah, so we do have a gang registry. We do have a gang database internally here. There is actually a federal law, I believe it's 28 CFR. I'm trying to remember what the rest of it is, but the officers who are in charge of maintaining that database. So with the way it's supposed to work is when someone's put into that database, it has to be based on specific, you know, observable behaviors, and they don't just stay in there forever. There is an expiration date on that. There's a time frame that if there isn't further activity, gang-related activity, they're supposed to be removed. Where some departments, you know, I think have gotten into trouble is they have maybe slacked off in the administration of that database. And I can tell you that we don't here. There is a training in that 28 CFR regulation that our investigations commander or his or her designee for, you know, whoever is monitoring and administering that database has to go through. And part of that training is making sure that we're compliant with, you know, what the current laws are in terms of keeping them in the database or removing them. So removing those who are no longer involved in that activity is something that's done on at least an annual basis as part of the goals of, you know, the investigations commander in our detective unit, the lieutenant there. So then hopefully that answers the question there.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to one of the previous ones. What is the ratio of sworn officers to civilian officers in the police department?
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
there's been a lot of talk, you know, a lot of the talk around defund the police has been about allocating funds. I don't think anyone means to defund the police, but they're looking at how the resources are allocated. And one of the questions that came up is, what is the ratio? And I think that referred to Tricia as well. What is the ratio of sworn officers to non-sworn officers in the police department?
Yeah, sure. So at full authorized strength, the police department is 99 employees. And that's, the makeup there is 61 sworn, and then it would be 38 non-sworn employees. So that includes records, it includes code enforcement, it's everyone, from the chief on down to the part-timers. It's that total number of employees. I saw that people were asking about the role of the CSO, the community service officer, and what that position does. We have 4 full-time community service officers. They work 2 of them work 8 to 4 and 2 work 4 to midnight. And so I think that, sometimes that maybe people don't know what exactly those employees do. And just real briefly, those 4 employees, they're extremely valuable to us. They provide support to line officers. So essentially anything that isn't an in-progress situation that is likely to or possibly to lead to an arrest, a CSO could handle. It could be traffic control, parking enforcement. It could be assistance at community events. It could be helping maintain a crime scene, animal calls, a wide variety, a catch-all of things, and they're extremely valuable to us. And so that hopefully that answers that question as to what the role of that position is here in the department.
Okay. I want to move on and ask Lisa Jackson if she could come in here and give me an idea of the intentionality of diversity hiring for U46, and what steps are you taking to provide diversity hiring in not just the administrative staff, but also in some of the principal roles and with the teachers themselves. What intentionality have you used to provide diversity there?
Great. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for the platform. I just want to back up for 1 second. If you look at my job title, it says Coordinator of Assessment and Accountability. So it doesn't say equity person. It doesn't say HR person. So I just want to throw that in. But no, that's not for you. Just so that people know that I am not the equity department, and we don't have an equity department. I stand on the shoulders of Dr. Ushma Shah, who was the first equity assistant superintendent. I stand on the shoulders of Ron Ragland, who was the assistant superintendent who passed away, who was the forefather of our equity plan. And I stand on the shoulders and join hands with an equity committee. So I'm on the equity committee.
Okay. All right, thank you. Duly noted.
Yes, yeah. So clarification. So people say, well, why is the coordinator of assessment and accountability speaking towards this information? And so I will go into, we have a, can I just back up for 1 second? When we talk about our equity piece, if you would allow me.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just out there, we have, I don't know how many people are on the call, and I'm assuming people get on the call because there's certain buzzwords, and the buzzword now is equity. But there may be people on this call who don't know what we're talking about when we talk about it. So if you give me a platform just to speak a little bit about what equity, because many of us, maybe growing up with our parents, when we talked about equity, it was about like equity in our home, right? How much ownership did you have in your home minus maybe a liability? And so it was around that type of equity. And this can kind of like slide into that also. It's like ownership. Who has the ownership, right? Who has ownership? And so that's what the equity work is about, is ensuring that everybody has ownership, and it's not equal ownership, but we have ownership and you have the ownership that you need. And I liken it to maybe some of you have seen, or when we talk about equity, it's, like there's a boy, these people, and they're looking over a fence, and who has access, and it's really about access. But if you allow me, I'll just use one illustration that I like to use. So when we talk about equity versus equality, equality is if we are all at a conference and it's lunchtime, we go get a box lunch, and everybody gets the exact same box lunch. We get a sandwich, it might be turkey, ham, tuna, you get a choice, but you have a sandwich, you get a fruit, a bag of chips, and something to drink. And that's equality. Everybody gets fed, and we make sure that they get what they need. But equity is really allowing a smorgasbord, a banquet, and people to come up and decide what it is that they need based on their appetite, based on their dietary restrictions, based on their wants, based on, so if I may go back for seconds. And so that's equity, because I need more, or I might not want any meat, or I might be allergic to whatever have you. I might be allergic to peanuts. And so I can't have that. And so that's what our equity work is about. And speaking of peanuts, equity work is really about the person who's allergic to peanuts. So if you think about our schools, you can't find a peanut anywhere in our school, no matter how high or low you search, because of a very small population of students. And so it was not saying, you know what, we're gonna have, just tell those kids that just to, pick the peanuts out or avoid peanuts. No, we have created a system in our schools where there are no peanuts. And so that's what equity work is about, is ensuring that we plan around those kids that have extreme needs, that have been historically marginalized. And those are the kids with the peanut allergies. And so we're going to create systems to make sure that those kids get what they need, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's our audience. Okay, so
Yeah.
going back to our equity plan and ensuring that there's a diverse workforce. I know in our equity plan we have so job descriptions. How are we ensuring that's like top of the line when it comes to that? Job descriptions and a hiring practice, right? That is culturally aware. And so you have to kind of roll that back and ask, so is it just that we want to hire a bunch of more Black people? Do we just want to hire more women? And so we ask our questions. It's not about just hiring more Black people or hiring more women. Actually, Dr. Teresa Lance, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Innovation in the Daily Herald, she actually said that, our students need to see themselves, right? They need to see themselves in educators and administrators. And so they need to see themselves. And so when we think about what that looks like, we need to make sure that our kids are seeing themselves with race, with religion, with, with culture, and so how do you ensure that that process is there? And so if I'm having a conversation with someone who's thinking about hiring people, what is it that you're trying to do? Are you just trying to hire more people of color? Or are you trying to ensure that kids are getting what they need? And so in our instance, yes, kids are needing more teachers of color in our district. And so they go hand in hand in hiring more, a Black, we have probably when we look at our disproportionality, it's flipped. We have a lot more people of color or Black people as administrators, as opposed to being right in front of our students, right in front of our classrooms. So when we're thinking about hiring practices, so I would think about, how do you bucket those things? How do you bucket, what are the non-negotiables around hiring? So, and then what are those things that you can train up? What are those things that you can actually train people? And what are things that really don't matter that we have systemically, traditionally, historically had in place? And examples of the things that we must have. Right now, we want to have leaders that are able to manage change. We are looking for leaders who are culturally proficient. We are leaders who are looking for people who can think systemically, people who can develop relationships outside of people who look like them. So those are things that we should consider when we're writing job descriptions. And then there's other things that are things that we can change, like certain types of skills. So it might be a program that you might be using. Is that something that you need to put as a must-have? And we often write it that way. This candidate must have this, but it's not necessarily that they must have that. That's something that we can train. Or that they must have, they must know our organization. So those are things that we can train again. And then there are other things that we should never have on our applications or job searches. Things as well, maybe not, shouldn't have, but when you think about things like education, and if we both have, a good education, great GPA, and my education was from, a school that you may not know, right? And then another person's education is from Harvard. Do we take that into consideration or not? Because my access to Harvard may be different than your access to Harvard. I may have been able to, do Harvard work, but I didn't have access to it. I didn't have legacy to it. I didn't have finance for it. I didn't even have awareness that Harvard was there. So that should not prevent me from being able to apply for your job, even do your job. And so those are the things that we have to consider when we're putting things on applications or asking people to apply and to consider things as though, like when we're looking at people's references, letters of recommendation. So I write a letter of recommendation for Trustee Porter, and Arnie Duncan writes a letter of recommendation for Trustee Porter. And so neither one should weigh more than the other, because you have access, or I should say someone else. So who has access to Arnie Duncan? Right? So those are the things that we have to think about. So, you know, so Sharmin might have access to Arnie Duncan and you don't. But my letter of recommendation for Trustee Porter should be just as good as Charmaine's letter, or Arnie Duncan's letter of recommendation from Arnie Duncan, if you're following me.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question, and Barry, you can chime in on this too. With the hiring process, and as we're going into hiring, one of the things that that as I've researched this and looked into it, that comes up is that many times diversity applicants, persons of color, Black, African Americans, are denied entry into some of these organizations because the hiring process is biased against them, meaning that if they're going into an organization and there are no people that look like them in the team or in that process of hiring, that can some of those implicit biases can rear their heads and therefore eliminate a person from a position that they may be perfectly suitable for. But when you have, let's say, an all-white hiring team looking to expand diversity hiring, that can be problematic. So what are these two organizations, both U46 and the Village of Hanover Park, doing to, and even the police department, but what are they doing to make certain that when we're going through the hiring process, that the teams, when they're looking to be intentional with diversity, that the teams reflect that diversity, if I'm being clear on that?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. That's a really important question. I think you go back to making sure that the people, that you have a process in place. It's not just that, you know, look at an application and then let's interview them. There's a process in place. And I think the process in place goes back to an equity plan. The process in place goes back to what are we trying to do? And then the process in place goes back to ensuring that we have diversity on our hiring team. And so that's something that U46 does. And it has diversity when it comes to programs. So we have dual language people that would be on that team. We have people from our special education or student services program that are on that team. Assessment department, it doesn't matter what the position that you're hiring. If we're hiring an assistant principal of a high school, all those people matter and they should be part of the conversation. That there should be Black people on that team. There should be Latinx people on that team. There should be, if it's a high school principal, there should be someone from elementary, middle school, and high school. So that should be just written into the work that you're doing, because not only is it important to have that diversity, but it's good to, you know, if I'm constantly, you know, if I'm looking, each group, each entity is looking for something different, and they bring that to the process, as well as being a Black person.
Barry, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the way we handle it, I don't have quite the diversity as you know, other organizations, so I don't have that ability to pull diverse hiring managers into the hiring process. But one of the things that we do is we use HR as the gatekeeper. So we have a process of reviewing applications that's consistent. It's done in HR, and we are the first ones to review and narrow down the pool of candidates. The other thing that we do is we have a standardized process. So it's a standardized process as far as the next steps, who's involved. We have a team of people that are in that hiring decision. So it's not left to an individual. and an individual's bias or so forth. We have a team that, again, includes HR. And HR serves that role to make sure that we are looking at candidates as a whole, and we are considering all the factors in making a hiring decision. So you have a team of people that are making that hiring decision versus just sending them on to a single decision maker, and having that consistency of it's the same process, it's the same person, it's the same HR group, I think lends itself very well to making sure that we are following our own procedures, and we're doing it the same regardless of whether it's an opening in the police department or the fire department or administration.
There's two questions that are coming through. One is asking about the makeup of the diversity in the Village of Hanover Park jobs. And then the second one, I think, is to both Barry and Lisa about, how do we retain diverse employees? What are some things in place? And maybe, Lisa, if you can start with that, since about retaining the employees, and then we can go to the diversity makeup.
Yeah, that's important. You can attract them and it looks good, but it's in order to keep them, it's to keep us. It's important. We in our plan, it's about how to welcome. In our plan, it's in place to how do we have programs and organizations within our group to welcome them. We've started doing that actually unofficially, but we've done where you just reach out to people, and we've been doing that in U46. There are people on the call right now who have been part of that 10 years back, that they were in groups where people would reach out to them and say, you're not alone. In schools, you work in silos often, and you may be the only person there in that building that's working there, and you don't know that there's someone that looks like you, that's going through the same experiences with you, that has the same frustrations, fears, and concerns as you do. And so in our plan, it is there's a plan in place to create these affinity groups so that people feel supported and they want to stay, and they know that they're not alone, and they know that they'll be supported throughout their time in U46.
Are the affinity groups just for the staff, or is that also, for the student population too?
Well, so our student population, we have groups within our schools, and so they would be separate from teachers or staff. But yes, there are groups within our schools, especially at the middle school and high school levels.
Thank you. And then I think, Barry, there was a question about, there were two questions. One was about the makeup of diverse employees within the village jobs. And then the second one was about, have any tangible changes come to Hanover Park staffing after your implicit bias training?
First of all, let me cover the breakdown of our employee population. Currently, we have 77% white employees, followed by 17% Hispanic, 3% Asian, and 3% Black. So we certainly have a gap to cover if we want to look like the residents of Hanover Park, and we realize that. We have made some tremendous strides in our recruitment efforts. I don't know if I would, tie our successes directly to our cultural inclusion training, because it was the supervisors, and I don't have that direct measurement, but I do know that our expanding of our efforts with recruitment and casting a larger net to try to reach out to a larger community and a more diverse community has been very successful. And we are making great strides in our hiring practices. It's just slow. We can only go as fast as the organization allows us to. And I think that's one of the things that, if you look at like census data over a 10-year period versus the makeup of the group, your census data changes much faster than the makeup of your employees. And on one hand, retention is great. On the other hand, it doesn't allow you to keep up with the need. So you have to really double up on your efforts and have plans in place that really target specific organizations, so that and where you're advertising and recruiting from, that becomes even more important.
Hey, Barry, are you aware that, and I'm sure you are, but to what degree have you utilized some of the diversity-specific recruiting firms that specialize in persons of color, Latinx, African-American, Asian-American? There are recruiting companies and firms that specialize in bringing forth applicants with those backgrounds. Have we utilized, or have we looked into utilizing any of those firms as a complement to our recruiting efforts?
No, it's been more of a direct, just directly going into certain websites. So, for instance, we would pass along our openings to the NAACP of DuPage County for the like a police officer recruitment. Have a standard set of organizations that we always recruit with. The National Minority Update website, for instance, the National Latino Peace Officer Association. We have expanded our reach with colleges. We have, since last year, expanded our reach to the City Colleges of Chicago. It's a group that I've used in my recruitment past, that you can't get a more diverse population than 80,000 City of College students than the City Colleges of Chicago. And then we have targeted, other institutions like for four-year colleges. There's a group called Handshake. It's actually an app. You can actually identify or select which colleges who work with Handshake that you want to advertise with. So we have expanded our efforts to, colleges such as Governor State, Chicago State. Loyola has an Arupe College, which is a great organization to try to recruit from. So those are the efforts that we've used, and we don't use recruiters. We don't farm out our recruitment efforts to another organization.
Would you mind if I added one thing to that?
Absolutely.
So I think it's important to cast a wide net. One thing that I do have, I want to add to the net piece is fish swim in schools. So you're going to catch the same fish when you cast that net. It's going to be pretty much the same fish. You might have a bigger pool, but it's going to be pretty much the same, and it might not be diverse. And so we might have to use like different tools. I don't know a lot about fishing terms, but like maybe poles, and you might have to just scoop some out of the water, or whatever you do to fish, do differently. So I'm thinking, sometimes there's radio station. When we're talking about diversity and culturally proficient, it's like, how do we maybe like radio stations, or go to churches, synagogues, temples? How do you know when there's African American or Black History Month? It's on 10 at that time, and people are really like engaged and take advantage of that. When there's the BET Awards, and I'm not talking about, I'm talking about big budget, if you have budget to do those things, but fraternities and sororities, I don't know if I said that, HBCUs. These are other avenues that we can use, and just to think outside of the box. How do we just blast it, but using different tools than we've already used, because it seems as though we may continue to get the same type of candidate. And we want to mix it up. We want to try and get someone who might not be going to LinkedIn, or might not be going to these same, traditional sites that may not connect to certain cultures. So how do we ensure that we're connecting to populations and that are diverse, and think or go and do things differently than we do?
Yeah. Barry, I want to ask you, thank you for that, Lisa. Barry, I want to ask you, has the Village of Hanover Park set an intentional goal in terms of diversity hiring where they have intentionally set a percentage of Hispanic employees or Latinx employees or African American or Asian employees as a percentage of the employee population. With that type of intentionality, have they approached diversity hiring in that manner?
No, not that specifically, no.
Trustee Porter, I just want to say we have a couple more minutes left. Somehow it flew by, but we have several questions, if we could go through a few of them. One is, how do you build equity and inclusion in succession planning, especially in departments like police and fire, where hires are often internal and based on candidates that have been developed over years? And then how do you disrupt or form a culture that has been built by leaders that came in the 90s in the height of suburban gang activity with a completely different lens of diversity? I think one of the other questions, going back to the first question about police and fire too, is I think there's a question about collective bargaining. So how do you, and I think in the U46 equity planning, there was a piece about collective bargaining and how you build that intentional diversity into it. Can you speak to that, Lisa, a little bit?
Yeah, I think what you're speaking about. So when ensuring that all of our components that are represented, we do a call to committee, and so that ensures that every program. So if we ensure that someone from a dual language program, from our special education program, from every grade level, that there's teachers represented, there's paraprofessionals represented, that there's administrators represented, that there's full representation on the committee. That's just part of the committee process. It tells you what the purpose of the committee is, the timeline of the committee, the length of the committee, and so that is built in, that it's already an inclusive process for committee work, if that helps answer the question.
Sorry, can you clarify so committee work for collective bargaining, or which committee?
So collective bargaining, the collective bargaining pieces, that's what I'm thinking you're asking me. So those who are in collective, so our ETA, that they would be represented, our DUSA would be represented on the equity.
Thank you. And then I think, Barry, if you could speak to the building equity and inclusion into succession planning. I can read the question again. How do you build equity and inclusion in succession planning, especially in departments like police and fire, where hires are often internal and based on candidates that have been developed over years?
I don't know, Chief, you want to take that one?
I can speak to that. You know, for the police department, Barry, you kind of hit on a little bit earlier when you talked about turnover and about how, you know, people staying in one place is generally, you know, we consider that a success. And when people leave after a short period of time, we tend to consider that, you know, a failure somewhere. And at the same time, we're recruiting from a modern workforce that, if you read up on it, they don't tend to stay in one place for very long. You know, in law enforcement, you know, historically, it's been a 20+ year career. You know, you get on with a department, you stick around, you hang around, you know, you work your way towards a pension, and then you retire with the same agency. That's changing somewhat. When we're recruiting now, you know, we're not just recruiting for right now, we're recruiting for the future, meaning the future of the police department's command staff, you know, if we're successful, is going to reflect that diverse hiring, you know, that we're seeking to do. So not only are we trying to cast a wider net, like, you know, Barry touched on with where we're recruiting and getting creative in terms of, you know, are we only posting our job, you know, postings in particular places? We're trying to think outside the box as far as, can we use social media to recruit for the police department? You know, I mentioned that Spanish language art meeting. You know, we have a recruitment piece that we built into that. So we're trying to pump that message out as far and as wide as possible so that we can recruit, you know, for today and for tomorrow and have diversity. Another thing that specifically we're looking at that I want to make sure I touch on is that part of our strategic plan is rewriting that recruitment plan for the police department, but specifically we're looking at the question of where are we losing, you know, in the hiring process, when we lose a diverse candidate, where exactly in the process is that happening and why is the next question. And then the final piece of that is, what changes do we need to make to prevent that from happening or to have a higher success rate. So, you know, those are the things that at the police department we're looking at going forward.
Thank you. Just another quick question I had for all of you actually is in terms of metrics. So when we are looking, you know, to implement some of these procedures for getting diverse hiring and retention, things like that, what metrics are in place to make sure that, you know, that is part of our goals? So how do you know that, you know, you are bringing in candidates, that our recruitment efforts are successful, and retention too?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for us, we're looking at the numbers, you know, on a year-by-year basis, and, you know, we are seeing some progress. You know, we're at about 28% minority officers now. That's the highest that we've ever been in, and it's, you know, if we go back, say, 5 years, it's about 6%, you know, higher than it was 5 years ago. So we can always, you know, we've got a demographic breakdown that we're updating, you know, as we go forward. And, you know, like I mentioned at the beginning, what we're looking for is, you know, how closely can we mirror the community? And we've got you know, some work to do. We've got a ways to go, but, you know, I think making that one of the major areas of focus for our strategic plan is our best way to set ourselves up for success.
Chief Johnson, let me just ask you real quickly, when you talk about the 28% diverse hiring or diverse employee number, in terms of intersectionality, how would you break that down when you look at Latinx, Hispanic employees, African-American employees, women, Asian? Because I think diversity means something different when it's said just persons of color or diversity, as opposed to being intentional with hiring more from the Latinx community, more from the African American community, more from the Asian American community, and more women. When you look at those in aggregate, you know, then it's different than when you break them out individually. So how do those numbers shape out when we look at them individually like that? Are you able to share that?
Yeah, so I have sworn officers in front of me. Currently, we've got 42 Caucasian, 3 Asian, and then we have 12 Hispanic, and we have 2 officers that, you know, would categorize themselves either as Caucasian or Hispanic. And then Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, we don't have any right now, and we don't have any African American officers right now. So that's the breakdown for sworn. I don't have non-sworn in front of me. I can certainly get you.
No, that's fine. I was just looking for sworn.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you.
If I could share just our metrics, I look at the bottom line, and that's hires, the breakdown of hires in percentage terms. So, you know, I may not be able to control the number of people who are leaving the organization every year, but I do have some ability to impact who's getting hired during the year. I can't tell you whether I'm going to have 20 vacancies or 40 vacancies. So looking at it in percentage terms, I'd just like to share some success stories with you, if you don't mind. Looking at our 2018 versus 2019 versus 2020 percentages. Our percentage of white hires in 2018 was 80%. 2019 was 72%. So far this year, and it's a small sample size because we haven't done a lot of hiring, it's 50%. So that's trending in the right direction. That to me is showing, even though I don't have a specific goal that I'm shooting for X, Y, or Z, that's showing me that we're trending in the right direction. That to me is showing that our recruitment efforts are working, that our goal of trying to get our workforce to look more like Hanover Park residents is working, but year by year process.
And I'll say our goal is much like Barry's, because as our demographics, as our student population, as our student demographics change, then the proportionality should change with that. And so that is our metric. But it's also around culturally and linguistically demographics, so diversity. And so just ensuring that as our population changes, then there's that proportionality with our staff, and that's in every area. That's a bus driver, that's assistant superintendents, that's teachers, principals, anyone who is employed in U46, it's our intention to make sure there's proportionality there.
Thank you.
So we're at 7:08. I was wondering, Trustee Porter, if you have final thoughts, or if you have final questions you'd like to ask.
No, I just want to thank everyone for attending this session. I think that as we continue to have these discussions, our purpose is to look at these discussions, get comments, get questions, get input from our community so that we can take this back to our village board and to our administrators and see if we can devise policies and procedures that will be able to alleviate and address some of the issues that have been raised during these discussions. So I want to thank everyone who has been online for all of the questions that submitted. Please know that your question may not have been answered during this session, but we do read each and every one of them. The last time we had a 4-hour workshop as a follow-up for all of the questions and issues that came up, and we probably will have something similar to that this time. I think Sharmin has some information on further activities and further events. But thank you all for attending, and I'll turn it over to Sharmin to close out our session.
Thank you. I just wanted to give all three of our panelists a quick chance to recap or have any final thoughts before I close out this session. Deputy Johnson, we can start with you, and then we can go to Barry and then Lisa.
Yeah, sure. So thanks to everyone who attended. If you asked a question, didn't get an answer, or you have a question that you would like to talk to me one-on-one about, or get a personalized answer, everyone out there, please feel free to call me or shoot me an email. We're available to you. We're transparent to you. We answer to you. So there's no question that you would have that we're afraid to answer. We may not always agree on everything, but you're certainly entitled to an answer, and I'm happy to give it to you. I just want to say, in closing, there's one of the questions that's in the Q&A now that talks about fear of the police, and I'd like to wrap up by saying that fear of the police is the absolute opposite of what we're going for here. The goal is for us to build a safe community along with you, and you to feel comfortable talking to us and being around us and bringing us your problems to help work towards solutions with you. I would love to discuss more with you about the positive non-enforcement context that we have, our events, our Cops Day picnics, things like that, and things that we're putting in place to have those positive interactions as non-enforcement interactions that I think would show that arresting and citing is not even close to all we do at the police department. So, thanks to everyone who attended this. And again, if you've got a question that's something that's bothering you, I'm always available.
Barry, would you like to close out any final thoughts?
Sure. I would just like to echo the thank you for the opportunity. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to share ideas and discuss some important topics. Like Deputy Chief Johnson had stated, if there are any questions that are in queue that I need to answer, I certainly will do that. If anyone has any questions and or suggestions, we certainly are open to that and welcome the feedback. So again, thank you.
All right, Lisa.
Yeah, so I just, again, like the other two gentlemen, we really appreciate your time and your effort. School District U46 is here to serve you, serve your students, serve the parents, and serve the community. That is our job. That's why we come to work every single day. And I'm going to read, we have 4 pillars in our equity plan, and there's student achievement, engaged staff, community engagement, and then accountability around operations piece. And quickly, I'll read the statement around community engagement because this is an engagement, a community forum. Our aspiration is that we will engage in meaningful and effective relationships with all families in the greater community, Hanover Park. And the district shall welcome, empower, and recognize students and families of all racial and ethnic backgrounds as essential, I love that word, it was before COVID, essential partners in their students' education, school planning, and district decision-making. And we will include and consider the input of government agencies, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and the greater community in general in ensuring equity of all programs to all students. So thank you all. Our service is to you. If you have any questions about anything, contact us.
Thank you to our panelists. I have a few final things I wanted to get through. One is, first of all of this conversation, the comments that we've been receiving from our community has been, the first town hall, as Trustee Porter mentioned, led to a follow-up discussion amongst our board in terms of, what the community asks were, and we had we had taken several steps to address those questions. Some of the questions were at that time were around strengthening our, the transparency around our police department, strengthening the language of duty to intervene, those kinds of things. We have worked to implement those. And then the questions that we received right now, we will have a follow-up board discussion. I believe August 6th is the next board meeting. And so, we'll have more answers after the board discussion. I will send a summary after that. And then we would like to have the third and final town hall in this series in September. We haven't finalized the date and time yet, and we'll let you know, once the time gets closer. And that one we'd like to focus on just, wrapping up this conversation, and also next steps in terms of continuing the dialogue. We'd also like to talk about, I know initially when we first began this town hall series, some of the questions were around, how do we support our community that's not just focused on, police being the first response. And so we wanted to highlight a lot of the community services that we do have available through our townships and other organizations. So just wanted to let you know about that. Otherwise, this has been an incredibly, fruitful discussion. Thank you all for attending, and we will have a recording of this. If you'd like to share it with those who have missed it, feel free to share that recording as well, and I'll attach that to our summary. Before we go, there's two individuals that I failed to mention who who are elected officials. One is School District U46 board member Eva Porter, and then the other one is Ada Corel Sepulveda, our village clerk. Two very, very important individuals, and we apologize for not announcing you at the beginning. So thank you all for giving us your time today.
And with that, thank you all for attending. Good night, and we will see you at the next meeting, at our next Peace Art Together, our community virtual town hall. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Right.